My name is Alvarez. I'm the Director of Wellbeing at Stanford Emergency Medicine. I'm just going to have the rest of the panel here introduce themselves.
I'm Mike Gottlieb. I'm Associate Professor of Emergency Medicine, the also Director at Rush University Medical Center in Chicago.
Are you able to hear? I'm seeing people squinting, so I'm not sure if it's on or not. Yeah. Stephanie will ask Pookie outside. Yeah. It's the last day of the conference, which means that many of us have lost our voice. Pookie, do you want to try this one again? Because the other one is not working. In true emergency medicine fashion, we're going to adapt and figure this out.
There we go.
Woo! Yeah, I'm awake.
All right, round two. So I'm Mike Gottlieb. I'm also Director and Associate Professor of Emergency Medicine at Rush University Medical Center in Chicago.
Hey everyone, I'm Sreeja Natesan. I'm the APD at Duke University, also the co-chair of our Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee.
Melissa Parsons, APD at University of Florida College of Medicine, Jacksonville.
Adaira Landry, Assistant Professor at Harvard Medical School, and I'm the co-chair of our D&I committee for our department.
I want to also just acknowledge there's many other people who is part of this team who's either not able to make it here because they're clinically working or they're also giving talks somewhere else. That's just because everybody's very busy. I also just want to say that none of us have any financial disclosures. I wish we do get paid for the things that we do here for fun, but this is also important work. We will share as well that you will have access to the notes and the conversations that we'll be sharing here with you. So please go ahead and take a picture of this. You don't have to open it just yet. You'll be able to access it later on. I will also say that at this moment, as part of a disclaimer, we are not representing our programs. We're going to be sharing with you some of the work that we've done and some observations, some reflections from the experiences that we've had, either being APDs, clerkship directors, fellowship directors, or being recovering PDs, APDs in the roles. Hi.
Make sure you say everything in the mic so we get your voice.
Fantastic. Thanks for reaffirming that this is a recorded view. So specifically, I just want to re-emphasize that we are not representing our program. We are giving you our opinions based on some work that we've done. And so really the goal of this session is to highlight that holistic review beyond just getting people into residency is important in order for us to advance our work in increasing diversity and representation in medicine. These are the objectives for this group. And in the series of slides that I'm going to go over, it's really just, again, you'll have access to this, but if you're one of those that feel like you want to take a picture, I support. So this is one of the 3 papers that we're going to be discussing, or at least referencing. And again, you'll have already access to this if you're in the Google Doc or Bitly. Here's the other paper. It's the Holistic Review, Mitigating Bias and Other Strategies in Residency Recruitment. And this is the third paper, which is on physician pipeline and pathway programs. Again, the goal here is going beyond just representation and recruitment, but also on retention. How do we take care of people? How do we make them feel like they belong? And again, this will be the handouts that we'll have. So I'll leave that there so that you'll have it. And then we'll just dive into the main point of today's discussion. So I'll be moderating. I'll be asking some questions. There are prepared questions. There are also opportunities for you to write questions at the bottom, and I will be able to access that. So I'll ask this question first. What are the benefits for implementing holistic review in EM residency recruitment?
So I think it's a good question because anytime you implementing holistic review, it's harder, right? You're doing more work. It's much easier to say, I'm going to pick 3 numbers and move on. And you're making a conscious effort to do something that is harder. And I mean, you have to think about why. Well, I mean, we can look around and see there's massive underrepresentation in medicine. We need to do better. In emergency medicine, we need to do better. And those traditional metrics that we relied upon, AOA, USMLE scores, when the scores existed, like that is not a good metric, right? It's a metric, and it's not to say it has zero value, but it should not be what we're relying on because it has high rates of bias, and it's been shown time and time again. And it doesn't actually predict what we want it to do. We want to predict good doctors. We want to have a better representation and better diversity, equity, inclusion in medicine. And relying on a numeric system that's prone to bias is exactly the opposite of that. We have to learn from our past. We have to be better as a result of it. We have to evolve. And so it's more work to do a holistic review, but it's the right kind of work you have to do. If you want to create equity, well, you have to do the work to fix things.
I'll definitely echo that. And I think, we think, now in 2023 that, the idea of like why, diversity, equity, inclusion matters is like very transparent to everyone. But I'll be surprised. I do work at an institutional level as well and also on some national committees. And it's really interesting how still the perception of, holistic review of, diverse recruitment does not have that for a lot of our groups out there, especially people in leadership positions as well. They may think that they're compromising their quality and things like that. Some of these old school kind of like thoughts are coming around. So we really have to be thoughtful that we need to know where our audience is and bring them into the space, invite them into the space and say, actually, this benefits our whole community by having diversity. And I like to think about it in two realms. So one is the med-ed realm, which, we're med-ed people, so of course I have to talk about that. But really the cultural competency and the conversations you're able to have, the discussions with the peers that our learners are able to have is much better informed when you have a diverse community that's there to have those conversations. And that's also in the materials, as well as the learners and the teachers as well, having a diversity of representation among all of those. And then definitely, I think all of us know, working in the ED, we serve a very diverse population base. We work with a diverse group of nurses, staff, techs, and so on. And in doing so, it's really important to have that representation among our learners and among our team as well, because this is where we can really help to combat the healthcare disparities that really exist, by being a little bit more culturally competent, being a little bit more sensitive to the needs of our patients, especially, because the whole idea of diversity, equity, inclusion is to eventually provide equitable care to our patients, and the only way we can do that is by really approaching this from a recruitment standpoint.
Great. So I also appreciate that the emphasis on really we have to work on combating that structural inequities that's in place. Perhaps there's a lot of heavy hitters in medical education in the audience here, so I thank you. And there's also people who might be interested in knowing more about holistic review. So how is holistic review done? Can you discuss some strategies for holistic review in the screening, in the pre-interview period? And also, how do you mitigate bias in the application process? I know that's like a triple, quadruple barrel question.
I'll take a portion of it then. So I think the most important thing is understanding who are your critical stakeholders, who are the people who really are going to be heavily involved in this process, whether or not they're the ones doing the review themselves or the ones backing it, but having those people brought into the conversation very early on and getting their buy-in. And I think conversations that should occur early on should be about what are our values, what's the mission of our institution, of our program, what are we trying to create, what sort of culture do we want here, and really having a very global and actually granular understanding of what is the big picture and how we can achieve it, and making sure that there's buy-in from everyone. And then I think after you get to that stage, it's probably important to make sure that you're thinking about how you can apply it throughout the entire process, right? Because holistic review is not something that's done just in the beginning of recruitment. It's not something that's done at the tail end, right? You don't want to just do it when it comes to selecting who you are interviewing, right? It's the entire process. Who you are interviewing, how the interviews occur, how are you discussing the candidates day of, how are you assembling your rank list. So it's a comprehensive change, and that requires a lot of work, which is why you really want to make sure that you have buy-in early so that you're not partially committed.
Awesome, and I'll kind of build on that part of it. Once you have that mission and the vision and sharing that with your team is really important. And so then it kind of moves into, unfortunately, we're entering interview season, recruitment season, and you're like, did we just finish that? That's right. It is like all year round, right, for us, especially in residency and leadership. And so we're entering kind of this impending interview season, or like a pre-interview season, if you will. And this is really where you want to have that mission or that vision be really transparent on your websites, be able to have the members of your faculty and your residents who are doing the recruitment be able to share that vision kind of very clearly, what that means for your program itself, and make sure that it's very authentic to your group. Because I would say your applicants can tell when it's authentic or not. And so, DEI, like global health used to be the buzzword, right? Everyone's going into global health, right? DEI should not ever be a buzzword. This should be like, we're doing this because it matters for our patients and for our future and for the world, really. So in that pre-interview season, having it on your like websites and stuff can really make a big difference. And then as you're prepping for the screening, this is really where a lot of education needs to come in. We do like a holistic review kind of conference for our whole GME, all the specialties together. Talk about where does bias exist in the whole ERAS application, and we actually do this for our department as well, for those who are screening for us, to be like, hey, don't put all of your money on just the AOA or the board review scores or the school name that they come from, because we know all of these have inherent biases with them. So letting them know where does bias exist, and just say, this is going to be hard work. We will have to look at some of those personal statements before, 2 minutes before they walk into the room, right? To actually kind of look at the lived experience of our learners and what they're bringing to the table as we're trying to choose who to interview. And then prepping for the season, Michael will touch a little bit more about this, is just really kind of coming up with a standardized process of doing that. So it's not just so much based on like your gut feeling, but really being thoughtful about that.
And I think that's really key, is that holistic review isn't just a sense of, oh, I think this person fits. That's actually one of the least ideal mods of doing it, because we just look for people that are like us. We want to figure out how they best align with the mission, the vision of our program. How do we consider the more holistic, the more global version of this person? And there's countless things you can look at. And I don't think you need to look at every single item on there, because you'd have a really difficult rubric to use. You have to find the list of it that matters to you and your program. And so as a framework, and not by far not the only framework, WMC has this model that's experience attributes metrics that lists this like series of 3 circles. It has a whole bunch of characteristics under each one. It's a nice starting framework. There's some things you might borrow and you say, this is perfect. I really care about this. I care about leadership. I care about serving underserved population. I care about certain aspects of it. And you may look at things and say, I care 0 about USMLE. You are going to find things that matter and don't matter based on your program. And there's not a right or wrong answer to your program, because the intention is to look at the applicant holistically in light of your program, so that the applicant and the program best align. And I think whatever you're doing, you have to be engaging your stakeholders, talking to your group, figure out what those things are, and then quantify in some capacity to avoid this subjective haziness that just breeds bias.
I really like that a lot, right? Because as Sri mentioned, DEI is not just an interest group. We have to really put in the work on this words that we're saying here, including changing the structures that we just highlighted earlier. And also that you don't have to reinvent the wheel here. There's actually models out there and frameworks that you can use. And so we talked about the pre-interview aspect of it. What is done post-interview, like the rank list, for instance, to ensure that holistic review and minimizing bias continues to be implemented throughout the process?
Can I jump back for 1 second,
love it.
LA, and then I'll come back to post-interview?
Yes.
I think one of the other things for us to consider, that even honestly when we put this talk together, wasn't even something that we had talked about, but with the changes that are coming now to the application for the med students going forward, we are going to have click boxes where they can say this was their experiences were community service related or were this related, and we may actually have a way to say these things are important to us from a holistic perspective and screen from that using the click boxes, which may theoretically, we will see how it actually functions in real life, but may potentially make our holistic review actually easier than it has been in the past. So that may be good news for us going forward. So now I'll go back to post-interview, sorry. So post-interview, how do we ensure that minimizing bias continues? I think one of the big things is whatever you're doing from a screening perspective, right, carrying that forward. So if you have some sort of a scoring rubric or something like that, making sure that how you're using it is still holistic towards the end. Like, one of the things that I would have brought up multiple times is, okay, well, if you have your USMLE scores on there and they're high, like they have a high number on your scoring rubric, is that really where you want it to be, and is that impacting where people are falling when you're making that rank list? It's one of the things that always worries me is like, okay, if we just go by this number, right, are we actually just putting people in order of their grades and their scores, even though we did all of this holistic review up front to decide to interview them? Are we actually just going backwards and putting them back in line by their academic achievements, and not necessarily by looking at them holistically and saying, well, this person had all of these other things? So that's one of the things that you really have to make sure that whatever weighting or scoring you're using is really weighted according to those values and the things that you care about when you're making that rank list.
Yeah, I'll definitely echo Melissa as well too. I think thinking about what is your mission and value, vision for your department is really important, because that is the thread that should carry all the way through the interview season. And taking different stop points during the interview season to say, are you meeting that with the applicants that you're actually interviewing is really important, because you don't want it to be post-interview season. You're like, I didn't interview a diverse class. It's too late. They've already put in their rank list, and it's kind of like over. So really being thoughtful about, we know there were 555 open spots in emergency medicine, right? And I still pause when I hear that, because it still breaks my heart, because this is an awesome field, and all of you guys are awesome. But it is challenging. In this upcoming year, we may get more applications, we may get less, and so being thoughtful of how we're screening that. But I will say the filters that we use can really have a lot of inherent bias to it, and so being really thoughtful. I'm an IMG, and I remember the first day I applied to 110 programs. That's how many that existed at that time. And actually, I was a poor medical student. I actually cried to my sister saying, I have no money to travel to the interviews if I even get one. But as an IMG, I had to apply to 110. The first day I got 90 rejections because of that filter, right? And it's not because of my board scores, which were quite good, not because of my letters, which were also quite good as well, but it's because I'm an IMG, right? So some of these inherent bias, but the talent actually lies in actually underrepresented. There's a lot of literature that underrepresented in medicine actually go to overseas because they can't get into U.S. schools because of the inherent bias that are there, right, and stuff. So being thoughtful about some of the biases that we carry with us. But the point that I want to make is just definitely carrying that DEI lens all the way throughout the recruitment season, and this is really where the rubber meets the road. So really, as you look at your rank list, to take a step back, zoom out of it, zoom out of the board scores, zoom out of the awards and all of this, and just pause and say, like, why is this person ranked higher than this? Is it some of our inherent biases that we're, introducing into that, or is that candidate really much more qualified than the other? And also be careful about those slows as well, right? Because there's a lot of gendered language and things like that in there as well too. That we know leadership words are used more in males than females, and then when we bring in the non-URMs versus URM, we know for students that get the same scores, the more powerful and strong words are given to the white students instead of the non-white students. So being thoughtful about even the slows have inherent bias because we're all writing them. To be really thoughtful about just being careful about the lens that you're putting onto this.
And Adaira, I'll bring this back to an observation that we saw as well on social media.
Yeah, I think it was in maybe 2020 or 2021. A few of us, and I think if you're on Twitter, you might have noticed this yourself, but a few of the students, or a few of my other APD colleagues and myself, we noticed that a lot of the people who were going unmatched and posting pictures of themselves and sort of making a plea, like, I'm interested in a residency position in this particular field, were people of color. And it was pretty pronounced, and of course there's a possibility of some sort of bias on who's on social media to begin with, but we came together, LA, myself and another doctor, Dr. Otogo, and we came together and we actually wrote a piece really inspired by who it is that's going unmatched, and how a lot of the numbers as far as who is ending up in the bottom of the list. We don't actually know, like these rank lists, it's all hidden information, right? And so the only person who really knows who is finally ending up where is like the residency leadership team, and maybe it's just the PD at some spots too. And so we actually really wanted a lot more transparency as far as where people fall on their rank list, and who it is, the percentage of people who are actually ending up unmatched by racial breakdown and not just gender, which I think is more accessible.
Yeah, so unless we get that data, at this point, it's really on us to work on this, to also understand, can we check ourselves to see like how much of this effort that we're doing in holistic review, getting people to actually get to the higher rank list that will actually make them a match in our programs.
Right, because you can have mixers all day, you can have socials,
That's
you
right.
can interview as many people as you want, but if that category of folks are at the bottom of the rank list because of, they don't fit in, then like what is all that effort for?
Yeah.
And we do tend to kind of grade, different people in different manners as well too. So that's where like some of the scoring rubrics can kind of take away some of that bias that's there. There's not a ton of data on remediation, but there is some data that says like 5% of our residents are Black, but those that get dismissed, 20% of them are Black.
Yeah.
So you see that it's very disproportionate who is actually getting graded differently, right, in residency, and that's and there's still more new studies that people are trying to do to gather that data, but at least in hearing that here at SAEM, by the way, that really stuck with me of like how disproportionate it is that we maybe invite people to interview, put them on our rank list, and then also wanting them to be included once they're in residency. All of that is really important.
So we're touching upon this already, and I'll ask it again because I think it's an important point. And I'll also overlay, and this one I know, Melissa's giving me the look again, like, don't change the question. But the reality is the landscape is changing. There are rules that's being put in place, including different states right now, that certain things that we're about to do or have been doing may not be allowed anymore. And so with that, I will ask the question, what are the challenges of implementing holistic review in EM residency recruitment? You can just pick parts of it. You don't have to do all of it.
I'm gonna ignore the state part of it. I think some of the big things will be looking at, I think a lot of it is still like leadership, or the institution still may feel very strongly that board scores or grades are kind of the primary thing, and may want to know, okay, well, wait, what are these person's board scores if they're at the top of this? The nice thing is step one is going to pass fail. I think that we as a group have to be cautious not to make step two the new step one. And I think that we will probably end up going that way to a degree, but remaining cautious that isn't, the goal isn't just to replace one test with another test, but was really to try to get away from some of that. And then, like we talked about your stakeholders, right? How do you get leadership, whatever that looks like at your institution, to kind of buy into our number one priority isn't going to be grades, our number one priority isn't going to be step scores, et cetera. And I think that one thing that we found helpful is having a small group doing that rank list that all does buy into the values and things that we're looking for with our holistic review. It's the same people that screen for us, and kind of having a closed door meeting of here's what's important to us, here's what we're looking for, let's do this. And then we actually pause and like reflexively check and do some numbers of how many people applied to us, how many people did we screen, how many people did we interview, and how they fit into different groups that we may be trying to maximize.
And I think, well, to your point about, there's some tension across various state lines. I will just say that it breaks my heart that something as important as welcoming a variety of people from a variety of backgrounds and interests and journeys traveled could be controversial and could be seen as offensive to others that were considering that. Just being in this conference alone, I would say the vast majority of rooms I have walked in, I was the only Black woman in a lot of the lectures I've attended. And so it's hard for people to see the impression that creates if maybe you are not that one person in the room every single time. And so the fact that it is controversial is really sad to say. I would say in regards to why it's hard to implement holistic review, I think, just in general in medicine or academia or in any workplace, really change is really tough. People become very accustomed to things and the way it's always been done. I mean, like, we've always done it this way, to me, is like a toxic workplace phrase, because it really limits change and creativity. And so I think telling people, we need to do this is often met with the comment of, well, it's worked in the past, our residents are wonderful, everything is great. And so I think trying to convince people that this is important too is a big cultural change and a challenge. The other thing is, I think, it's been a little bit mentioned, is that there's no standardization as far as how holistic review happens and if any one particular route is better than the other. And so I think the fact that there is a lot of room for variability, for instance, even in my own program when I was APD during holistic review, which, by the way, I feel like my program director, both of them did a really great job implementing this, and I think we learn every year, there is variation in how I describe distance traveled compared to, let's say, my colleague, right? And so I might say distance traveled is, being one of 6 children, low income, and, having both parents, but those parents struggled. Someone else might say, well, being the only child and being raised by their grandparents, not having their own parents with them, is distance traveled. And so, like, everyone can define hardship differently, right? And so that makes it really challenging to standardize.
I really like that, because I think that in conversations of looking at diversity and diversity 3.0, and diversity as a vehicle to excellence, then we can navigate a lot of these conversations about, like, this is just DEI work. It's not. We're actually selecting for excellence here. And embedded in that is using the holistic review, because we can say this because we have done a lot of research on this. I'm actually getting goosebumps saying this, because a lot of the papers on gender bias, a lot of the papers on bias in SLO were done by people here. And so we can say that these things that we think are not supposed to be biased are biased. And so by using holistic review, it allows us to minimize the bias that exists structurally in medical education. So I really appreciate that point. And there's also the need, again, SAEM is education and research, right? Being able to collect and track data, even within your own institution. Where have we come from? How are we doing? And how are we progressing? Because then it keeps us aware of our intentions, the mission, vision, values. So we kept on putting it on our website. It makes it a lot more authentic for us to actually play that part. So thank you. I really love those. I'm going to follow with the next question. What can we learn from residency recruitment then to apply this to faculty recruitment and retention? Because there's a lot of similarities here.
Yeah, so I've been fortunate to be able to work in a really wonderful environment. At the same time, when I started 7 years ago, I was the only Black woman faculty member in my department, actually, across multiple, all of the hospitals that we were part of. And it became very clear to me that when there were resident issues, especially when I was an APD, that were related to being a person of color or underrepresented or even a woman, people were coming to me. And I would say now that we have really pivoted in trying to have a diverse faculty membership, I see that there's a lot more option and choice for residents as far as who they can go to for support. I think that should be the case. They shouldn't have just me. And so that's very important, that there is a pool of people they can turn to. And when it comes to residency interviews, they want to see that. They want to see that there's going to be people who can understand their perspective, right? And I would say there's different, we all need different things when it comes to mentorship. And some of it is I need help with writing a paper, I need help with reading EKGs. Some of it's I just need someone who understands what I'm going through on an interpersonal level. And the best people to do that are often, from my personal experience, someone who has lived it and can really speak to the feeling and the emotions and sort of those nonverbal experiences that are really hard to understand, especially when you're really early into the workplace and you're what do I do? And so I think working on that faculty pool is really important, because your applicants are going to look at who is there on interview day. And they also are going to look at like, you know, your website, and they're going to see like, oh, well, you just have 2 or 3 people here, and those are the 2 or 3 people on your entire applicant, on your department faculty list as well. So you want to be mindful of not over-representing and making it seem like you actually have a ton of diversity by putting everyone there who's a person of color or who's a woman on the interview day. Like that's also not the correct way of doing it. So you want to be meaningful and thoughtful, but also authentic to who you really are as a department. And then the third thing I would say is, and we do this really well, is that our like bonus is actually tied to being part of the interview experience. And so now it feels great because if I really want to be there and I really want to be supportive to applicants and interview more days, I don't feel necessarily as taxed as I might have if I was just doing it because I felt like that representation was needed. Like I also feel like now the department values my time in a different way that was not there previously.
Can I go out of
Yeah,
order?
of course. I love this.
Okay, great. I'm just playing my LA role. So one of the things that you touched on really well was kind of the mentorship. And I have a not very diverse faculty group, and some of my residents have come to me with like, hey, I really need and want a mentor who looks like me and somebody who has that lived experience that I really can't necessarily tell them what I would do in that situation because I've never had that situation. And so one of the ideas that our group has come up with, because we don't have a great representative faculty, is how can we do this cross-institutionally, right, and use DEI groups at our shop and other shops and have them meet via Zoom, right, because there are some good things that have come out of the pandemic, and can we use Zoom to get kind of groups at different institutions together so that they can have those discussions on their, collaboratively among different institutions. And so that may be something that we can work towards going forward.
And I think ultimately you have to kind of put your money where your mouth is. If you value this institution, which you absolutely should, you need to tie things to it from the ground up. So you can't passively expect that things are just going to happen. You make active efforts. You reward and value the time put into it rather than taxing people who are already being, in a system that traditionally does not value appropriately. And you tie it to the metrics. You track the departments. How are you meeting your diversity? How are you doing in terms of not just pure numbers, but your efforts, your initiatives, the degree to which you have focused a mission on this, and you have accountability, and you have check-ins, and instead of hiding it behind doors and saying, I best, and having it be this hidden thing, is have it be visualized so that we can call attention and fix it. I think that's where it needs to come into, and there needs to be money put into that. The institutions need to put the time and the money in to value this the same way that they do about RVUs and the new Surgery Center. This needs to be something that has had dedicated funds put into it, dedicated leadership roles assigned to it, dedicated accountability that goes all the way up to the C-suite and beyond to the board, where it's a visible topic of discussion as opposed to some hidden thing that we all say, I wish I had this. Because we can wish all they want, but if you don't make the effort, nothing's going to change.
Dr. Ogle? I knew you were going to come back there. I thank you.
Around, doing this work, what ideas do you all have about being creative about the titles and the work that's being done? So the work is still being done, but it has a new name. Like we had a couple of conversations in the luncheon about other ways that you can you can brand this, or other ways that you can ensure that there's a thread throughout what you're doing without using the buzzwords that for some folks
Sure.
are not going to be able to get funding for this
Sure.
if they call it that.
Sure. For me, I can take part of that. In my role, I'm the co-lead of our human potential team. So there's a team that meets once a month on optimizing the individual and the teams to do well at Stanford. And so part of that is going to be inclusion, belonging. So things that we do does not necessarily, again, This is not an interest group. This is embedded in the culture. This is embedded in the work that we're doing. And therefore, I can honestly and authentically say that whenever we do things that are going to make people feel included, creating support systems, incentivizing the work that we're doing to advance inclusion and belonging, then that's more than just being focusing on representation. That actually focuses on optimizing the human potential.
And I would just add, like, I would love to get to the point where we actually don't need the titles, and I mean, I would like it to be that we control that process versus some other bodies telling us we can't use it. But, I think, something like having, as you said, this director of human potential
team.
or
I know, it sounds
chief
very
people
cool.
officer or community developer, whatever phrase you use to sort of cloak the issue or address the issue, rather. I think the goal is that it should be part of the department in a way that doesn't feel like it could be put into a closet or a box or a corner. It's just like woven through everything we do, right? Similar to like how we have women's groups, like why can't we always talk about just advocating everyone instead of needing that? But that's, a far-fetched goal, but that would be nice, is that we actually don't need these titles anyway.
Yeah, so I like that. So finding ways to change the language a little bit, again, to make it inclusive, right?
Ellie, the question wasn't probably picked up on the mic. Should we just say what the question was?
So the question is with the changing landscape and perhaps the fear of the impacts of state legislations and new rules of what we can and cannot do, specifically on efforts on diversity, equity, and inclusion, how might we address that problem? Did I capture that? Perfect. To follow that, I see Sri.
So I was just also going to say, knowing your institution as well is really important, and their kind of a stance on that can really be important, because then the moves that you make and the initiatives and the movement forward is supported by their vision as well, too. And so I think that's really important to not only align with your department, but also your institution as well, to kind of help to move that forward. And then also, if you tie to health equity and health disparity work that is there, and we do know that the outcomes for different patient populations are very drastically different, then all the things that we're doing, from recruitment to inclusion to belonging to the climate of the learning environment and also clinical environment, all kind of links together. And they can't come to you and say, no, don't worry about health equity or health disparity, because that needs to be supported.
Yeah, and I will just say as well, having gone through this in many iterations of creating holistic review within our department and across the entire GME and also medical school, we talk to lawyers. Because we have seen, before the new recent changes that happened in several states this past year, we've seen this, right? Programs are getting sued. And so we have to understand that there are real ramifications for some of the things that we do, and we can be proactive with at least having some legal language of discussing that. What I heard here as well is that we need, in as much as we're trying to be creative, the bottom line is that diversity work should no longer be volunteer work. Whether there's titles or whatnot, we need to not just support this, but actually incentivize the work. And so in discussing strategies to implement having this deliberate approach to increasing retention of diverse residents and faculty, what might we do to get there?
Well, retention is an interesting topic. I would say the vast, and this is like maybe an N of 10, but the vast majority of people I know who are people of color wanting to leave medicine or have left medicine, I'm not so sure it's because they weren't respected from their DEI title. I think it was more that they just felt overall unwelcomed or unsupported. And so I think when it comes to solutions, actually the first is quite easy and inexpensive, which is just listening without coming to a sort of preconceived judgment or solution or impression of what someone is telling you. The vast majority of people, and myself included, when we feel like we're experiencing something in the workplace that could be discriminatory, racist, biased, and we want to tell someone about it, we feel like we are often unheard or not taken seriously, right? And so that creates then a culture of not wanting to report and sort of just tolerating. And this is, again, like I have colleagues across the country who tell me that this is happening at their places too. And so, and I think it's because a lot of times that the folks we are reporting to, they want to think that they are surrounded by good people and that the people are well-intended and that the errors or the issues that occurred were accidents or unintentional. Like it's hard for people to believe that. And actually, like a good analogy of this would be, you know, if you were to go home to your house and be with your parents and your siblings, you'd say, this is such a warm, welcoming environment. Everyone is so amazing here. I love my family. But if I were to enter and they would be rude to me, and I told you that, you'd say, there's no way my mom would say that because she's the most wonderful person. She treats me so well. And so it's really hard sometimes for people to understand that, like, someone you love could also be not supportive of someone else. Like, that's just really hard for, I think, some people to grasp. And so I think that's the easiest thing, is just believing what someone is telling you could have been possible. And then I think the second is, when it comes to inclusion, that needs to be a very active process. It's not just a matter of recruiting someone and now they're part of your department and DEI work is done. It's really integrating them fully and putting them in committees and giving them leadership roles and not just being on, members of a team, but actually leading the team. Figuring out what skill sets they have and what skill sets they lack and want to obtain, and teaching them, right? Like teaching people how to lead research projects so that they understand how to get a K grant or like all that stuff. So active coaching. This needs to be balanced, right? Because to Sree's point about 20% of Black residents are dismissed, a lot of that is based off of professionalism and not necessarily actual clinical aptitude or knowledge gaps. So you don't want to come off as overbearing. You want people to like learn and thrive and not feel like they're being micromanaged and under some sort of scrutiny. So there's a lot of complexity here, but I do think that recruitment is not just getting them into the door. It's like this very comprehensive process of making sure that someone who might be the only member of your department, as far as their personal identity, feels welcomed.
Yeah, and then incentivizing the DEI work that we do. Lean In just published some data in the last year that showed women leaders are twice as likely as male counterparts to spend time on DEI work, but then 40% of them also say that DEI work isn't acknowledged in any of their performance reviews, et cetera, right? So the DEI work that we are doing, how does that become incentivized for us? Is it part of an academic value unit or academic productivity unit at our shop? Is it something like, interviewing you get actually reimbursed for, as opposed to having a minority tax of I need you to be here because you are a certain gender, race, ethnicity, et cetera, those sorts of things. And how do we really incentivize that for our faculty so that we aren't putting a lot of work on, those of us on the stage or those of us that are trying to do the work, but actually making it something that is used for promotion, is used for financial incentives, et cetera.
And definitely, I think we shouldn't underestimate the power of inclusion, right? Inclusion is like, inviting someone to the dance, but actually asking them to dance, right? So they're not just standing in the corner saying, like, I don't belong here, but actually saying, like, you have the talents and skills, and we want to utilize that. And there's a lot of study, especially in undergraduate literature, but it talks about, like the scholarships that we give for underrepresented, students. And the attrition rate among those students is so high because they don't feel like they belong. They're taking out of their home where they feel, the cultural sensitivity that's there and stuff too, and put into a completely different space, and they end up feeling like a failure, and they end up leaving, right? So the attrition rate is really high if you don't have that sense of belonging, and also the rate of like mental health disorders, depression, anxiety, all of those things, imposter syndrome is also high in this group too. So it can have a lot of lifelong effects as well. So the power of creating an inclusive environment, we're talking a lot about recruitment, but I would challenge all of us to say, now that we've invited them into the door, is how do you keep them there? How do you say, you're welcomed here as part of our family, and we value what you're bringing to change all of us for the better?
I think just one thing to be conscious when you're seeking out active inclusion of this is to make sure it's something of value to them, and you're not just including for the sake of including, both valuing what they're bringing to the table, but also not overloading a bunch of tasks that take up their time, that have no promotional opportunities, that have no time associated with it. You're including and investing. And I think we need to be conscious of that, because it's really, sometimes it can be easy to just add someone to a series of meetings. And that's not really actually valuing them, including them as a person, or helping them to grow and evolve and go down their pathway too.
And I will acknowledge that Mike has really mentored all of us on this stage in getting work published and all that, which is really to the point, as Sri mentioned, like being invited, right, to dance. But belonging is not just being invited to dance, being taught to learn how to dance, because many of us may not be dance people, and we don't have the skills to do whatever dance, and also being able to then play the music that you want to dance with, right? So I can riff off of this because like that's what you've shown us, right? Like you've taught us that, oh, maybe you can learn how to do qual research, or maybe you can do this research, like going through the IRB process. Like that to me is a great example of belonging, because of this, right? The T-Chants and the Gottliebs in the world have led so many research done. Like these are just some of the papers that were written on DEI space because of mentorship and feeling like we belong in a group. So with that, I know that we're like 4 minutes before the end of this. I just want to share my gratitude to this team here, and also the people, you in the audience, and whoever else is listening to this later on, because each of us has the capacity to actually make a change here for the positive. You don't have to necessarily change the structure if you don't have that role yet. And you can still check in with somebody. How are you doing? Like asking without really telling them like this is what you need in order to be able to dance. And so with that, like, thank you again. And any questions, please feel free to ask us questions, comments, reflections. Hi, Dr. Lovato. Yeah.
I'm on this committee at our shop, and we have representatives from a number of different specialties, and we're trying to come up with some consensus on how we're going to approach this. Understand that there will be different
Yes.
variations between between GME programs, and a lot goes back to what Dr. Landry was saying as far as there being heterogeneity in definitions.
Yes.
So, do you have any suggestions on how to get to some kind of a common definition for some of these things, like whether or not it's jury travel or experience or
Yes.
whatnot? Because we're going back and forth on
That's
it.
right.
Any ideas on that one?
I can share my experience, and I'll ask the group as well. So I led this task force in a GME at Stanford, and so what we realized is, you're right, there are, like in emergency medicine, there are things that we value, like community service and other things. And orthopedics may not value some of the things that we care about, right? But having a shared understanding of what that is, what we did was we had each of the specialties in GME be part of this task force. And then each of us kind of shared whatever versions of holistic review we had. And we had created a list of all of these things that we value. And then each department can then add, like, this matters to us more. So for us in our department, research and innovation is very important. So if you have like a patent, we'll give you like ×2 or whatever number, but then you can adapt it depending on your needs for that department and still have an agreement that as the School of Medicine, these are the things that we value. And then it's a lot easier then to have that discussion when you're asking for, because also the other thing that we realize is that at the end of the year, we have to give a report card of like how diverse our group is. But if the diversity is already preset by a certain number, then it actually forces us to do efforts on certain things, because the other efforts that we're doing are not incentivized, including things like work on LGBTQ plus population and all the other intersectionalities of the work. And so we were deliberate, and we're still working on that. Like at the School of Medicine level, at the GME level, can we establish like what is really valued as an institution versus what we value in our department?
And I think also just making sure you have the same framework, like a foundation at the beginning of like where does bias exist in the ERAS application already is very powerful, because that is not understood. And I'm surprised, among talking to many different people, is how much people still have the the thinking that this score, this award, or this whatever it is the most important thing, right? And so just allowing them to understand like all of these things have inherent bias, and that's why putting all of the scoring system on one of those is not going to be good enough for that. So just being really thoughtful. And then ACGME also has like a holistic review kind of section in there. In our paper as well has some of the rubrics there, so you can kind of meld and match kind of to meet your needs for your institution.
And I think even as you led off and were saying how you were building this out, I like that you pulled stakeholders from different departments, so it's not contrary departmental visions that don't align with the institution. And I think that's really, really helpful. Even if you're right, there's going to be areas where they're going to differ. Emergency medicine and surgery may have different value systems, but there should be a lot of similarities.
Yeah.
The difference, the only thing I might consider in there as well is your stakeholders are obviously program leadership, but they're also the residents, the patients. The stakeholders are pretty broad. So think about who your end users are. Try to make sure we're using a really broad view of that. And that's another way we can think of, are there metrics and attributes and experiences in areas that we're missing that we from our lens may just not be seeing that are really important, and that may serve some galvanizing there too as you start to realize, oh, actually a lot of these things mattered a little bit less than this thing that we didn't even realize was critical.
And one of the things as an opportunity, I know people have to leave, and thank you again, is that an opportunity is to work with the medical school also, because what we've encountered is that a lot of the GME work is very separate from the UME world, and their platform is actually a lot more robust. Like, there are several identifiers that you can actually look at to see how diverse, beyond just the demographic, including like socioeconomic status, things that are invisible perhaps, to consider. And so for us, like, it took us 5 years, but now there is an Office of Diversity in Medical Education at our institution, because we just kept on doing all of these work individually as different departments, and we made it easier for us. Again, thank you so much for our time. Really appreciate you.